I'm Shane White, and this is The Process.
Hey gang, Shane Patrick White here with another edition of The Process. Today on The Process, I want to talk about inking with textures. And it's not something I do a lot of, but what's great about it is if you can take the opportunity to experiment a little bit, you may find that they come in handy later on down the road. So today I'm going to take a look at using a comb. I tore up a basketball. I don't know why, but I didn't think it was any good anymore. I save and find textures all the time. So this was, I think, packing material. Here's some more packing material that's more of a bubbly texture. And then some more packing material, which I think was used for earrings or some kind of fine jewelry, a natural sponge, toothbrush, good old paper towel. It's got a pattern on it, and a synthetic sponge. So let's take these for a spin. I have a container lid for now because I'm going to have to really get in there and add some ink, but I need space because some of these pieces are larger than I had anticipated. So we'll just take a crack at this. And what you'll find is, like, when you're doing this kind of texture research, you may start seeing things. It's kind of like an association game. So for instance, let's take a synthetic sponge. Sponges obviously take up a lot of ink. So you have to mitigate how much ink you actually put onto the sponge. So I can use the corner of the sponge and I can get something out of that. I can lightly tap it and I get a nice texture that looks a little bit like concrete. Let's see what you can do with that. So you bounce it around a little bit. You might find that you can drag it, and it has a brush effect, which is actually really cool. Never really played with this, but look at, I can make a grass effect. Now, the one thing, the caveat I would add in some of this is if you're trying to ink comic books or do an illustration, you will probably use these materials a little bit differently each time. If you use too many textures, then it starts looking gimmicky, and that's something you want to try to avoid. So the next texture I'm going to use is this red. I'm not even sure what you would call it. It's very smooth, but it's a packing material, and it's got an interesting pattern on it. Part of the issue with stuff that has patterns on it is that the ink will sit in the recesses. So I'm going to take and I'm going to blot some of the ink off of this, just so I have some of the texture will come through. And then we just press that in lightly onto the paper, onto the substrate, because you may be using anything between, plywood, Bristol, canvas. And this isn't just for inking. You can obviously do this with painting. And the reason why I started exploring this a little more is the fact that Photoshop brushes tend to use textures a lot of the time, and they create interesting effects. And what it does is it plays with the eye and suggests that maybe there's more detail there than there really is. And I'm not sure what I would call it, but it has a stochastic principle to me, which means it breaks up the surface and in such a way that it adds micro details that might be interpreted as texture or something else entirely. So with this texture, the sort of grid-like, bubble-like texture, I'm both tapping it down with one finger, if I drag it a little bit, it doesn't really give me that much of an interesting thing. But if it dries out a little bit, I can kind of get some interesting stuff going on there. So that's that. That's a kind of a fun texture. It looks very specific though, you know. It doesn't have as much range as you saw with the synthetic sponge, but that's why we're experimenting. So right now I have this multi-layered sort of cotton. I think it's more like a synthetic cotton, but it's almost like baklava if you really, look at it. Baklava is a Greek dessert, which is fantastic. So I'm wetting the edge with ink, and I'm just gonna kind of dab it down. And this is a little more chaotic in how the ink, it starts spattering everywhere because of the really fine details. I'm gonna drag it, and you kind of get an interesting look with that. There again, sometimes what I do is if I'm messing with textures, I'll actually scan these in and make Photoshop brushes out of them. But you can even see with this, it sort of implies a field of wheat or something. Because the fibers are very micro, I can get super sensitive stuff. So I'm gonna ball it up like this so I have more of a, not an edge, but more of a center part. Let's see what we have. Just do light tapping. And that has a really interesting spatter effect without actually going through and spattering. And if I drag it, I can do all kinds of fun stuff. I can put it down and I can pick it up, put it down, pick it up. And that gives you yet another option. So this one's a little more chaotic, and that's kind of fun. So it's like trying to keep in mind the type of texture you're working with, what it can do, and what the scale of that texture is will help you and inform how you use it in your piece of illustration. Right now we're going to use a synthetic sponge, and I think, yeah, as predicted, it's very stiff, but it kind of gives you a very nice medium size. Like if the synthetic sponge is considered a fine spatter or texture effect, I think the same family of texture would be this natural sponge, but this would be like a medium to large kind of texture. And I can see how I could use that in an illustration. So if I drag it like I did with a synthetic brush, you get bigger strokes. That's really interesting. And if I sort of jog it, I get almost like water effect, like waves or something. So if you are able to control how you use these textures, it'll give you some really interesting options without it looking gimmicky. The next piece I'm using is, I guess it's a synthetic packing material, but it's almost like, I don't know, it's like not bubble wrap, but it's it's air filled. So like the red texture before, this should look a little more natural, not as pattern based. And it's interesting because it's not much different than the sponge, natural sponge we just used. But there's got to be something different about it. It doesn't look like the sponge in the least. Let's see. Lightly touch it down. What if I do little strokes like that? It does look like grass. I'm not so interested in this one as much. Let's tear it down a little bit. Maybe we can get some better control. Sometimes if the ink is drier, you can get a different effect. So now I'm rolling it because I have the option of rolling this texture, and it might look like a tree trunk, like birch, if you're familiar with a birch tree, So again, you could take copious notes on each of these textures and ask yourself, how does this work? What does it look like? What is it like? So here's a basketball that I had for a long time and decided it's time to get rid of it. I think what I would do though is probably buy a small child's basketball, perhaps. One that has a higher grain on it. Right now this is pretty worn because the basketball itself is easily 20 years old. But again, this is a really nice texture. It almost looks like zipatone, like some kind of chaotic zipatone. But if you wanted to control the density, you'd have to look at the ink distribution and then, blot it and then press it down and see if you can control how it looks. So that's the textures. Oh wait, I got this one. Sometimes I ignore the simple textures like a paper towel or an oil rag or a piece of toilet paper. Oh wow, that's beautiful. Look at that. Now this is what I would call like a micro texture. Oh, that's gorgeous. See, unexpected, but there it is, staring me in the face. Wow, that is really neat. Wow, it almost looks like skin. Wow, that's so cool. All right. Now, let's see if I drag it a little bit. That's gorgeous too. It's almost like an ink brush. That's really neat. Speaking of ink brushes, let me throw this guy at you. Sometimes we have brushes that we have available to us, but we don't really use them. I bought this initially to do some oil painting, but it wasn't the type of oil painting that I wanted to do. In the second part of this, I did a real quick illustration sort of layout and wanted to just jump in and try to establish a few guiding lines. That way I have something to hang these textures on. So I ended up using a regular Ticonderoga pencil, but at the same time I wanted to have a face that was large, a full figure, some organic matter, and some inorganic matter. So I have a female samurai who's just chopped the head off of a robot, and then there's some bad looking dude in the background. And the setting is probably on the ground somewhere. So let's see if I can just quickly establish some real general lines and light source. So I think I'm going to have the light source coming from the upper right hand side. I don't typically ink this way when it comes to comics, but when it comes to illustration, kind of anything goes. As you may have noticed in the earlier part of this demo, I did not include the brush or the comb, and that was by accident. I totally forgot about those. And I also ran out of paper. Not that I don't have more paper, it's just I ran out of space. So I thought, well, let's try and incorporate that into this piece. So as you can see, I've got a lot of action lines that I'm incorporating just to try to get the general shapes locked in. Now, if I were doing this on a typical comic page, it would be a little more complicated. I'd actually photocopy or print out several versions of the page, potentially, and cut out the areas that I wanted to mask off. Or I would use a heavyweight vellum like Denral and trace off the areas that I wanted textured, and go about doing it that way. That one's a little more expensive, but in the long run you can actually see your drawing, tape it off, and I think the vellum is less likely to curl, because once you get a certain amount of ink on something, that is a potential for danger. Well, not real danger, but it will potentially curl on you and make it very difficult to keep the page or the actual masking from getting in the way. So she is generally established. Let's go down in here, getting a foot. Now, yeah, maybe I would do this as a sketch at a convention, or who knows, depending on how it turns out. Maybe it'll turn out good enough to be an illustration. But by not putting too much pressure on myself, I don't really care how it turns out. I just want to have fun, and I want to be able to put these textures to use. I grew up in the 80s when they used to have a bevy of karate, Chinese, Hong Kong martial arts films from a station down in New Jersey. And I lived in northern New York, hours and hours away from New Jersey. But on Saturday, they'd have a thing called the drive-in movie. And there's where I was exposed to Shaw Brothers, Kung Fu flicks, and Hong Kong cinema. And it was just glorious. Some of the coolest stuff I had seen to date. I mean, it was right up there with, in my mind, with Sergio Leone spaghetti westerns. Very outrageous, impossible in some cases, exploitation type cinema. I guess I could have done this beforehand. That way you didn't have to sit through and watch me ink. So I apologize for that. If you're interested in commissions and the like, or even purchasing some of the art you've seen on my YouTube channel, you can always inquire. I'm always trying to get rid of art in the sense that I gotta make room for more art. So I do price these reasonably. You just have to email me and inquire which ones you're interested in. I've been collecting a lot of art lately, mainly because I'm trying to learn how to become a better painter. And I've been painting for a long time, but there's nothing like having originals available to you. Once you get to a certain level in your career or skill, your ability to decode paintings and what the artist was thinking while they were creating it is kind of something they don't really teach you in school. So that's why it's really good, if you can, not only to get to museums and see original art, but to also start collecting original art. I don't know if it's a good investment. It just depends on the artist that you end up following or admiring. But I think in the long run, you could spend your money on worse things, like movies thinks that, well, I mean, maybe movies aren't so bad. But you certainly would extend your education by buying original art. I kind of wish I had done it earlier on, but I'm in a place in my career, in my life, where I can actually do these things and not go completely broke. Because as anyone will tell you, original art is expensive. Can be expensive. It just depends. Who knows? Sometimes if you befriend the right artist, I'll sell it to you for cheap. Okay, almost done. I'll try to get this big headshot. This is so strange. I never really do this. Should definitely look into doing it more. I think what I want to do is be able to establish this light source. That way I can tell exactly where I'm trying to fill in the texture parts. Because if you don't, this thing can get away from you. And that's the part about this technique that is something you may run into. If you don't plan it out, or you're not familiar with the textures, it can get out of hand, and they could look pretty bad, actually. But remember, the first time doing anything, it's gonna be bad. I mean, that's just the whole point of it. It's because you've never done it before. So try to find ways to incorporate it. Try to find opportunities to have fun, and take it from there. Okay, I think we're ready for texture. So this, and there again, I still might screw this up royally, but the hope is I can get you to see what I'm seeing when it comes to messing around with textures. Okay, I have some water nearby, so I'm cleaning off my brush, which is super important. If you don't keep your brushes clean, they will fight you. Okay, first things first. Let's see. I didn't get a chance to use this comb, and I might be regretting this. So, I don't know. Let's see. What do we have here, folks? It's kind of fun. Have a look at that. That's awesome. Oh wow, that is so freaking cool. Wow, it's making me think about things differently. Now I'm just tapping it down. There, it almost looks like muslin, some kind of muslin. What did I learn from before? I learned that this brush does some pretty cool looking foliage. So maybe I come up with a sort of a tree organic thing here, which will play nicely with the not so organic robot. So if the light's coming down like so, there's that. Yeah. And there again, when you're doing this, you don't necessarily only have to work in black. You can actually go back in with whiteout and establish other elements. It's kind of crazy. Okay. Again, brush, water, keep things nearby. That makes sense. Let's see. Some synthetic. Get some hair in there. Wow, that's interesting. It's funny because it almost looks like you save a bunch of time by using these, and you very well could. But again, a little bit goes a long way. You got to find that proper balance. I say proper loosely. She's got some pretty interesting hair too. Oh, see, too much. Now it's like I don't have a highlight that I'm looking for. I have to put it in lower. And there again, you can almost come up with a dry brush effect on some of this stuff. Sponges will hold a lot of ink, so if it's already pre-wet, keep that in mind too. If you're loading it when it's dry, it will take probably a little bit more liquid to make it work. Okay, so I've used about 2 or 3 things already. And what did I like? I did like this a lot. It had a nice skin texture. Oh, but wait, there's more. I'm curious if I can get a nice pattern in the hat. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll use an implement to push down in the areas that I want the texture to go to help control how it lays. Gotta be careful. It's easy for this to get away from you. Sometimes it's also interesting to double up your textures. It gives you some options. See, oh yeah, this was more of a stone kind of spatter, so I'm using the organic or synthetic cotton for the stonework around the robot. I think what you'll find too is at some point you're gonna have to go back in with white to break things up, to reestablish edges. But that's okay. I mean, it's a pushing and pulling sort of learning with this stuff. If you get a chance, check out Jorge Safino. He was a master at pushing and pulling black and white. His work would have lots and lots of buildup of white out in ink as he was making decisions per panel for each of the pages he was working on. Sometimes he'd go super simple, sometimes he'd go very detailed, depending on if it was a close-up of a face. It all depended. I'm kind of dragging a little bit the ink on the stone. I want a little more contour. Help sort of establish a horizontal ground effect. Okay. kind of interesting. Let's see. Now I remember liking being surprised by the effect of the paper towel. It looked like skin for some reason. See if I can capitalize on that a little bit. So what I'm doing now is I'm just moving the ink around and trying to get it thinned out a little bit so it's not, so there isn't a lot in there. Let's see. Let's see if I can, what I can do. All right, so this guy has some shadow. It's kind of fun. Wow. I can feel it. I can feel the anxiety. It's like, I don't want to screw this up. It's when you have to release the result. Just let it go. Don't overthink it. Ideally, if I had a paper towel that had no other textures in it, this could look very natural. But as it is, I'm making the best out of it that I can. Definitely gonna have to pull some highlights out of there. But as you can see, this is looking interesting in a big way. So, okay. Let's see, oh yeah, forgot about that. If I drag it a little bit, it kind of gives me a toothbrush effect. I don't know. Not sold on it, but well, it's kind of nice when you get the dry ink. It's a nice halftone. That's pretty cool. Yeah, don't forget, it doesn't have to be dense black ink either. It just depends on what you're looking for in terms of the finish. Okay. Let's see. All right, I think I need to establish some more edges in the line work. Okay, so yeah, I want a shadow effect. I'm going to put it there in the hat. More shadow underneath. You start to see volumes taking effect here the more you experiment. Let's see. I think I remember the sponge giving me a nice grass effect. Is that true? Yeah, looks pretty good. I'm telling you, these things, it's worth saving. It's worth experimenting. I gotta remember to blot sometimes. Okay, all right. Oh, that's interesting. Maybe that's what this needs. Do some cross hatching with a sponge. Gives you an interesting texture. Okay, all right. So So that's the basis, and now it's about trying to go in and refine some more. And let's go back to our traditional brush and build it out. Work on some of those details that got missed. Establish some shadows that we've started that we need to make more sense out of. So it's a mix of textures and contour. I apologize if some of this is not in focus. I tend to guesstimate, generally, where my art is in relation to the camera. So let's see. Just to stop trying to make it comic booky. Let's get this guy's eye. Crazy eyes. It's actually, I think it's the first time I've done a whole piece like this. In the past, when I was working on Shadowrun RPG stuff, I think it was 3rd edition, I'd use a lot of splatter. That was just kind of a way to keep things fun and fresh. But I didn't really use anything like texture pads. This is kind of like a newer development. It's funny because back in art school, I remember talking to a lot of industrial designers, and they'd use texture pads when it came to sculpting. And we did that too when I was a sculpting director years ago. We'd have texture pads to create skin tones or who knows what rock textures. But then I just kind of forgot about it. And it's one of those things, it's what's interesting is that digital tools can remind us of how to push ourselves in traditional media. So if you have an opportunity to expand your skill set, you should take it. It's kind of fun. The thing about doing these demos is like I have to be careful not to get lulled into the zone, because then I stop talking and then you'll be like, what's wrong? Though I'm assuming if I'm using music, I'll probably let that roll. And yeah, like most people, I come up with a story for these random illustrations, whether it's a female samurai who's gone rogue from her cybernetic emperor. Now that I think about it, I could make a fun story. It's like a new age of samurai. I remember watching some film about the end of the Edo period, which was the end of the samurai who was kind of a glorified figure, but was also antiquated as guns became a new way of winning wars. I'm not traditionally a Japanese historian by any stretch. I just love film. So it was interesting to see the end of one era and the start of another era. I think there was two films that I remember. One was called not The Last Samurai, no. It was, it might have been the Ballad of Narayami. And I can't remember the other one. The other one, sad, so sad. Poor samurai. You could tell he was becoming obsolete, which I think most people with professions worry about those sorts of things. It happens to everyone. Even if you're a rock star, creator, artist, or whatever, at some point the question will be asked, how relevant am I in all this? That's why you have to keep reinventing yourself. You have to keep pushing, and this is one way of doing it. It's to not rest on your laurels. It's to always question established rules and study. Just always got to be studying. If you don't study, well, younger people are gonna pass you by, and then you'll be like, I don't know what's going on. I was so enamored by this scarf that I didn't really fully develop this bonsai tree. And for that, there is no excuse. Just want to maybe I'll take this, see what I can do here. Come on. Yeah, you're probably asking, what's he doing? It doesn't make sense. Why am I whispering? Okay. Poor little robot. He just wanted to be loved. Yeah, this guy is it's gonna be interesting to try and pull back from the brink. In some ways it looks like he's got too much texture. But there's still some things you can do. Yeah. Okay. I'm not saying this is a great illustration. But it offers me some ideas. Hopefully it offers you some ideas on what is possible. And like I said, if I had done this before a few times, I'd have maybe not only my talking points, but perhaps a better understanding of how to apply these things. Okay, so he's on a rock. So let's establish that contour. Let's establish her shadow, shall we? And she's standing over him, so we need to establish her shadow on top of him. There, see, it's starting to come together a little bit. As you know, I am a fan of robots, so these are my go-to enemies. Not all robots are bad, are they? Okay. I need to establish that there. Okay. I kind of get the sense that some of this is working pretty well. Maybe having a... Let's get the natural sponge in here. Hey, natural sponge. What can you do for me today? I think my ink is drying out. I wanted to do a sash. There we go. Sash. Sachet. Right? Right. Okay. I kind of want a little bit of shadow on his teeth. Do we have any juice in there? Let's see. It's always good to test somewhere else before. There you go. Some shadow on the teeth. A little bit of shadow from the hair. Okay. Okay, I think mostly everything is there. You know what? Still not convinced. I want more from this tree. I want it to look like a tree. What was I thinking? And that's the thing too, it's like when I go back in with say white, I may have to go back in with black. So you just bounce back and forth until you get it right. There you go. Nice core shadow. There. It's a little bit better, right? Sort of, please. Love me? Okay. You know, and I'm telling you, I'm still in love with this comb. I think I'm gonna pull out the jams a little bit. I'm gonna risk it. I'm gonna risk it all. Got ink that's pretty deep. And I'm gonna drag this across. Come on. I'm flipping around. See if this works. Come on. That's pretty cool. I want it to look like cybernetic weirdness. It's kind of fun. I don't know what the heck I'm doing, but it's kind of fun. Now, if I had printed this out or cut masks of this out of vellum, then I might be able to establish some safe zones. You could also cut up smaller bits of comb to get different effects. So anyway, I think that'll do it. Okay, now it's time to start messing with, oh, you know what another thing is? Fingerprints. Now, there's some artists who use fingerprints liberally. artist, I won't name. But that also establishes a kind of a fun texture if you don't typically. Yikes! See? Exactly. You gotta, you know, pace yourself. Again, you know, if you've done this enough times, you kind of know what to expect, know what you're looking for. So look at that. It's me getting into my art. If you don't mind the feel of it, you could always drag. Now we're about to apply whiteout. And I say whiteout, but I really mean white gouache. The type of white gouache that I use is whole bean permanent white. Now, why do I use permanent white? There's also a brand or what do you call it? Another type of white they create called primary white, which is a mixing white. You use that to mix with other paints, and it gives you a better overall look and feel. I think, oh wow, that wasn't quite dry, whatever. That's fine, I'll just deal with it. Okay. The reason, what I'm getting at is permanent white is more permanent. I think it's a thicker consistency based on what I've been told. So we shall find out. So I'm going to squeeze some here. Actually, hold on. Well, no, I will. I'll put some here, but I actually have some in here, which is really, it should be really thick because it's been sitting in that container for a very long time. Okay, so I have a brush which I'm going to use. This is number 3, and I hope I have enough water in here. So start pulling out highlights and things like that. Edges, like her hair. I had really wanted her hair to feel a lot better than it is. Now, depending on the look you're going for, you may have to hit this a couple times for the opacity to really show up. What's the difference here? Let's see if I have a little bit of water. Can I do it? Okay. See if there's a difference between what I have in the cap or have in the container and what I just squeezed out. The thing about gouache is you have to find the right balance of moisture and pigment. It has to feel like honey before it actually gives you decent coverage. At least that's what I've found. Okay. Let's see. I don't know. Maybe this is the wrong brush. Take it. Yeah. Yeah, it's a little too thick. Blasted. luckily I have a number 2 in the wings. So let's take a look at that. I was using a number 3, which is a little bit of a junky brush, but in this case it was a little too junky. So I wanted to get some finer lines on this bamboo hat. Whoa, whoa, totally different than what I was hoping for. Oh well. And that's the thing, I think, between doing traditional comic book inking and creating an illustration. You have to allow for accidents to happen. I mean, you can do that with comic books, but you're kind of on this serious deadline. So unless you really know your tools, it can be probably more frustrating than you're used to. So just keep that in mind. Even though I do comic book experiments on the side in between jobs, I rarely experiment on the job. It's the stress is way too much. Some people love that. Some people like the by the seat of your pants approach to life. I'm not one of those people. And knowing that ahead of time can save you a lot of headaches. Why make it harder on yourself, you know? That's what I've always thought. Okay, let's see. What is interesting? So when you're doing any illustration, you're trying to establish what's the most important part of that illustration. What is interesting to you? What excites you? What would excite the viewer? By doing that, you're able to put the energy and effort and focus where it needs to be. It may be with details, it may be with edges, contrast, color. In this case, I think I ended up doing myself a disservice by rushing it a little bit too much. But that's okay. Get it on the next one. I will say this has been a lot more fun than I had anticipated. And I do want to do this again. Maybe with less pressure, which is when the cameras are off. There's always so much more pressure when I'm filming than I'd like. I don't think that'll ever change. But I'll give you this, you know, if you want to learn how to get past your anxieties, film yourself while doing something and explain it. You'll get a lot more comfortable in your skin. It may not be perfect, but it'll be a lot better than it would have been in any other circumstance. Wow. I'm telling you, man, this is so much fun. Oh, man. Oh, crap. Yeah, screwed that one up. Okay. No, my water just went right into my white, so now I have to pull from this guy directly. Again. So, okay, what do we got here? Try to get some some wires. Ooh. It's funny because like when I'm painting in gouache, I can get some really fine detail. But it seems like when I use gouache to ink with, I just can't get it to work the same way. It's really weird. Okay. Again, establishing edges because you need to separate foreground, middle ground, and background. This may be a good opportunity for rim light. So keep that in mind. We work our way around the entire image. I also squint too, just to see if these choices are making sense. Squinting will help you define your values, which is important, as you may know. Especially when you're using halftones. Otherwise, everything will look like the same value. Personally, I like adding numbers in illustrations. There's just something about numbers in letter forms that I really like. I think what it does is it balances out the organic quality of a scene by putting in structure that could be fun. You should try it, you might like it. L'énorme visage. Right? Probably not. I'm behind in my French skills. Terribly. Terrible. I was taking lessons for a couple of years. Well, not a couple of years, but for several months. I tried to keep up with it after I got back from Paris, but could not. There were so many other things that got in the way. And I still haven't had a chance to read all my books that I got in Paris from 2 years ago. So for that, I am sad. When? I know. You know, whiny child. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. I'm able to establish a little more. Or if I should try a secondary light, give me some fun edging to work with. This guy also had wires under his skin, which I thought was kind of gruesome. God bless it, just cannot get a thin white line. took my time. Yeah, there you go. Okay, it's looking pretty good. Establish some of the shine on the teeth. Squinting some more. Let's sharpen that up. Okay, let's little neck call out. There we go. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. It's not working out. And that's a fun thing too, is all these textures you could be using with gouache. You'd have to obviously mix up a lot more gouache than you're used to, or any paint really for that matter, but I think gouache is probably the safest. You might get a decent effect with acrylic, but I don't know, with acrylic it doesn't have the same amount of coverage, and so you're gonna, you can do some textures, it's fun, but I think I don't know, that's a tough call. It depends on the type of gouache you use too. Like fluid acrylic, or sorry, the type of acrylic you use. Like fluid acrylic, you can get some real interesting versatility. Maybe I'll try and do a demo with fluid acrylics, just to show you all what I'm talking about. I think you'd really enjoy it. I don't paint in it too often. It's just I've got so many other painting sets that I've bounced between that acrylic kind of falls by the wayside for some reason. I'm not even sure why. I mean, I like it all right. I guess I just don't love it. I'm more interested in oil paints, and gouache is closer to oil than I think acrylic is. So given that, it's pretty rare that I bust out the acrylics. I think what I do like about acrylics are the versatility. They're I don't know, they're super versatile. With gouache, I can scan relatively easy once the piece is dry because of the matte finish. It's incredibly portable. It's harder to paint outdoors with acrylics and keep everything wet. I know there's certain types of acrylics, like potentially soft body acrylics, that don't dry out as quickly. So I certainly could stand to experiment more if I was impassioned by them. But I've already spent a lot of money on gouache, so I'm sticking with gouache, at least for the time being. And two, when I travel, I usually bring a gouache kit. It's just, again, it feels more like oil. It's lighter to transport. Watercolor, you have to wait for it to dry in a lot of cases, especially in damp or high humidity environments. When I was down in Costa Rica one time, it took forever for the gouache actually to dry, so there are some exceptions, obviously. Well, what do we have here? It's coming around. It's getting there. As you've noticed, I probably should use some of these texture pads to show you what is possible with gouache. I don't know how I feel about it. Doing that right now. I think I screwed this part up. Okay, let's, yeah, I don't know. I'm not inspired to get in there with a texture pad and gouache. Trust me, you can do it. I just don't feel like doing it right now. I think I'm liking a lot of where this stuff is. So I don't feel as compelled. Maybe some spatter. Maybe I'll do some spatter. Come on, spatter. I might try to add some, break up some of this spatter a little bit on the ground. What's interesting too is when you go through and if you scan this stuff in and decide to color it, you can further pick out edges and establish things that you might not have been able to do with traditional materials. So again, something to keep in mind later on down the road. It's crazy. It feels like real art. What does that mean? Well, who knows? I think when we're making a mess, it feels like real art.
Hey gang, it's worth noting that I also have a Patreon. I cover a lot of stuff about comics and storytelling, as well as storyboarding and running your own freelance business at www.patreon.com/Shane Patrick White. I have 4 different tiers available for you to check out today. If you've ever had the desire to start your own art business, this is the Patreon for you at www.patreon.com/Shane Patrick White. As always, thanks for watching. And also, don't forget to subscribe to The Process. And please, if you have more questions, feel free to leave a comment below.